Joanne Weiler, and hi, I'm Joanne Weiler, and welcome to week 5 of Shine in 2016. Wow, what a fun interview we had last week with Dr. Tisha Morgan. I loved her idea of the 4 quadrants of give, take, allow, and receive. And I'm sure there's other things that you are putting to practice. I know for one thing for sure, I will never look at a toilet paper roll in quite the same way. Anyway, you're probably starting to realize that so much of your life experience is about learning and growing and continuing to be a lifetime learner, and then applying that growth to strategies that you can use every day for yourself, especially for yourself. We're often thinking in terms of what others need to do around us, or about our jobs need to be different, and all the factors need to be changing around us, when really, wherever you are, there you are. I think there's a book called that. And so today I'm quite delighted to invite someone who is an Imago therapy specialist, and she will be sharing some of her knowledge and wisdom that she's discovered for the last 23 years of practice that she's had, and in putting on groups for the last 6 years as well. And you'll find out ways that you can actually, whether you're actually currently in a relationship or not, if you're on your own, you're in relationship always within yourself. So that's the neat sort of takeaway with all of this, whether we're talking nutrition from the early stages of the weeks, or talking about focusing what we bring to our lives is really within us, and within us to change relationships. So to change the relationship we're in, the relationship, but to change who we are within the relationship. So it's my pleasure to introduce Maureen McEvoy, and welcome to the Shine in 2016, Maureen.
It is such a pleasure to be here, Joanne. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. And so I want to ask you, what inspired you to become an Imago therapist 23 years ago?
Well, it's a little bit of an interesting story. So Imago is a Latin word for image, and it suggests that who we find ourselves in relationship with is not just by sheer happenstance. And so for me, I have been working with a lot of people who had trauma histories. And I was finding that we were doing good enough work with the individual work, but somehow it wasn't transferring over into their relationships. And I agree so much with what you're saying, Joanne, that we are people who are designed to be in relationships. You know, we're mammals. We're designed to have our people around us and live in troops. So I got curious about how could I find an approach that would work to help people understand more about what was happening in their relationships. And I have, over the years, trained in a variety of different modalities around working with couples, but I keep coming back to Imago all the time because it has a useful way of understanding that our growing up years definitely influence our current relationship. We need to understand that, but then based on that understanding, we want to move forward. We want to begin to figure out how do we change that in some kind of way so we're not always held hostage to our history. And so it's been really great over the last couple of decades to have worked with so many different couples in both private sessions and in the weekend workshop, and see that come to light and see people make changes.
It is really rewarding, isn't it? I know, and I just can't help but notice in the background you've got the perfect metaphor for what we do, because all of the relationships from the past are held like filing cabinets, right, that get opened at different times, kind of like projections. You've got the perfect thing behind you, and how you help people align those and bring, so that they can bring the best version of themselves, the most loving version of themselves into their current relationship. And that has got to start with you.
Yes.
So what would you say is the best part of your job?
I guess the best part would be this watching couples turn the corner, watching them understand each other with new eyes, and begin to see each other in a way that is less about, you're my enemy at the worst, to somebody who just really doesn't get me, to then understanding that, oh, you and I are in fact perfectly matched and we're trying to call each other into health. And if we could accept that differences, then we'll be able to have a really different way. And when that starts to happen, people just really grow. There are some incredibly tender moments that happen. And to be able to be the one who's facilitating that and witnessing that is really quite special.
Yeah, and when you've got a sense of yourself, then I can imagine that there is better energy or more positive energy to bring forward to your partner. You're mentioning like being critical of the other partner, and you probably find more capacity then. Are you noticing that with clients?
I think that what happens then is you begin to understand why you get bugged by whatever your partner does. And you begin to understand that, in fact, it's really not that much about your partner. It's much more about something inside of you. And so those who go on to have success start to get curious about their own reactivity. Like, what's going on for me that I get really bugged the fact that you are late or that you don't empty the dishwasher or whatever these things are. And in the workshop, we ask the couples to start these discussions by choosing a very small issue, and we say, the pettier the better at this stage of the learning. Like, just do something like, I'm bugged that you don't put your shoes away, because we know that whatever the issues that underline the dishwasher, the shoes, the whatever, those are the same issues that are going to underlie the really big issues that are in our relationship. And if you can understand it at the smaller level, when it's not quite so charged, then we get to see those bigger issues in a very different light. And you begin to understand, oh, okay, this is more about me than it is about you. And I do have power to be able to change myself. I have less power to influence you, but I have lots over my own behavior.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because it's true that once you start to be curious about yourself and you notice those shoes and you're thinking, okay, why is that bothering me? Okay, I feel, the shoes are in the way, and then are there other parts of my life that I'm feeling blocked? And then it really is a conversation that would be quite intimate with the partner to say, I've been feeling really blocked at work or with the kids, or, it's really never about the shoes, is it?
It's not really what you think it's about. What I often say to people is the way that our brains work sometimes works against us a little bit in this. I don't know if any of your speakers have talked about sort of the brain in the hand kind of model of that.
Good idea. Go over that. Yeah,
All right.
the flip your lid. Yeah.
So yes, so this comes out of Dan Siegel and Mary Hartzell's book called Parenting from the Inside Out. And they ask us to think about our hand as a brain. So this is, your spinal cord. This is the part of your brain that is back here that does blood pressure, breathing, those essential kind of things. Here is where one of the big filing cabinets stored, and this would be the limbic system of your brain. And it's the part that really is always watching from the time we're born, busy taking pictures. And then, of course, this is our big brain that goes over top of it. And that's the part that we really use to think our way through things. It's not very much on board when we're born, and that has that huge growth, 0 to 5 years. But this limbic brain has been busy taking pictures all the way. And if we think about what we learn from relationships from the point of view of a baby, it goes something like this. If I cry, some people will come running, and they will immediately start to try to help me and try to give me what I need. And they'll feed me and burp me and change my diaper. And if I'm still upset, they'll just, assuming they're good enough parents, they'll start rocking me and petting me, and maybe they'll take me for a drive, right? And so the meta message that we learn, our first template of relationships, is if I'm upset, you'll come running. I won't have to tell you what I need. You'll know what I need, and you will just give it to me. And that gets in the way sometimes, because we have this experience then with our partners that you should know why those shoes bug me. You should therefore figure that out and stop doing that. I shouldn't have to tell you. And if I need to tell you, then somehow you're not doing it in the same kind of way. And if I'm asking you to do something, you're only doing it because I'm asking you, not because you love me. And if I have to ask it, then it's not good enough, so I'm not going to ask you. And so we get into this crazy little thing where we need to kind of understand, all right, something's about the shoes is bugging me. And so I need to get curious about what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then if you aren't met in the relationship, so if you express your needs, let's say you share this with your partner and your partner doesn't respond, then what happens? Do you want to talk about the sequencing?
Well,
Just, you know, about the secure, maybe talk about relationship attachments, the sort of styles of relationship.
okay.
Mm.
So there are basically four attachment styles. So one is a secure attachment. Those of us who had good fortune to grow up in good enough families where we had a sense of somebody had our back. That's the central sense of it. Many more of us grew up in families where it wasn't quite so good. And so we developed either an anxious kind of style where we're trying to prove that we're good enough, we're trying to please our partner, we're trying to do what we think would be necessary in order to keep that person loving us. Some of us develop kind of an avoidance style, kind of like I'm on the island and I don't need anybody. I can just manage by myself. Thank you very much. Because we kind of learned that it's painful to be in connection with people, so we pull it. And those are the folks who, you know, have a hard time connecting with people and making commitments. And then the fourth one usually is associated where family situations were not that healthy at all. And that it's a kind of attachment often referred to as disorganized or disoriented, that if things were frightening or frightened as a child, maybe your parents were frightening or frightened themselves. So you didn't get to have that sense of somebody's got my back. And what that means is whatever style we tend to have as children, unless we do something different to learn different ways of being and therefore earn secure attachment. And that is the good news in this, is that even if you have some of those insecure attachment styles, you can earn secure attachment. But unless you do something different, then you're likely to approach your relationships from one of those stances as well. And so majority of people have had experience being in a relationship or know of friends where one or both of the partners are in one of those insecure styles, and there tends to be more drama, more pain, more ups and downs in the relationship style. And so that kind of dovetails then with the stage where when couples first get together, there are so many chemicals running. You know, the song about Love Potion #9 really did have some merit to it. There's so many neurochemicals running that we are kind of drunk in love. You know, we are able to overcome some of our inhibitions and fears and show up in our best selves because we're supported by all of these drugs. Unfortunately,
And,
those
and
drugs.
And it's kind of like the filing cabinets are closed, right? You know, the metaphorical filing cabinets are closed, so there's no seeing, you know, you're feeling good, and in the euphoria of those drugs, you don't actually project the stories that haven't been resolved.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. We um, even if you saw something in your person you're just dating, that you typically two things happen. One is either you don't see it, you're just kind of oblivious to that negative kind of experience or that negative trait that they have, or the fact that they leave their shoes. Or if you do see it, you somehow put some kind of a positive spin on it because the drugs just allow you to kind of do that. And as you said, the filing cabinet's closed. Now, what happens that's unfortunate, but we really need to understand this, is we habituate to those drugs and we don't pump up them as much as we used to. And so then that delicious sort of romantic stage comes to an end. And as it comes to an end, that usually is when a couple is starting to make some kind of commitment to, you know, move in together or buy a property or do whatever they're going to do. And so the drugs wear off just as the commitment goes up. And that means, therefore, it's a bit more dangerous now with that higher commitment. And so then that's when it becomes more difficult to, you can't not see things all of a sudden. The person hasn't changed in their way of being in any way, shape, or form, but we were just able to override it in some way. And now the filing cabinet, especially the stuff that's in here, starts to knock on your door and draw attention to it. And so then couples go into this very predictable, very inevitable stage of, struggling, having some conflict about who's going to be the one. Right?
So, Maureen, is the struggle that part that you would call, you could name it the imago? Is that what Harville Hendricks would define as what the imago is? Is that what you're talking about?
He would say that the imago is kind of like a blueprint, that it's an impressionistic, like an impressionistic painting, an impression of the positive and negative experiences and traits that we experienced in our growing up years. And that's who we're going to be attracted to in completely below our consciousness level. That we're going to find somebody who somehow is able to, in the way that they are being with us, evoke a similar situation. Mm-hmm. Like it's not the same thing as like, this partner's got the same personality, right? But it's more about some of the way that they are creates a similar feeling in me. So Harville would say something like, let's use an example that's a bit more definitive so that we can grasp the concept. Let's say I grew up with a depressed mother, okay? And it is the result of that was that I wasn't able to really feel much joyful connection with her. So I'm likely to find a partner who may or may not be depressed, but however that happens in my partner somehow evokes that same sense of I'm not able to have a sense of joyful connection with you. Mm-hmm. Or another example would be, let's say I grew up with an alcoholic father, and I make a very serious decision that I actually interview all potential dates about their alcohol and drug history because I'm not going down that road. And so I choose a partner, and surprise, surprise, I find out this person doesn't use alcohol and drugs, but is perhaps a workaholic or something like that. So I end up feeling the same, that something is always more important to me, that there's all these broken promises, that kind of sense. That's what he would say is the imago, this impressionistic feeling that gets created. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the model is so great about creating space for that, what's going on in between to be held, and so that the person can have a new experience. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
The reparative experience with their partner.
Right. Sure. So let's use this last example, and let's say I did have the alcoholic father and now I've got this workaholic partner. If I'm able to say to my partner, what happens for me when you stay late at the office all the time, or you break our agreements to go do something because you're going to stay working or something, is that I end up feeling really unimportant. I end up feeling, that I don't matter to you. And then what the Imago therapist does is help that person to then make that very deliberate link. And what this reminds me of, or how this is a familiar kind of feeling. And then once I'm able to explain that to my partner, now we have a really different understanding of what probably has been a repetitive fight. Like, you're not coming home again, all that kind of stuff. All of a sudden now we have a very different perspective, and we could say, all right, so that is happening in the here and now, but it's also fueled by the part that's coming from behind. So it's now conscious. You can actually think about it. And assuming that you have a partner who really does want to be your partner and really does want to be in relationship with you, then together it's much, much easier to begin to figure out some agreements about how you're going to go forward to do something different. And then it's like running a set of experiments, really, that you're going to try to have this agreement and see what happens. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then clearly there's more that we need to understand around this before we can make it be behaviorally different between the two of you.
Yeah, and so using that model and being in the Imago dialogue, you create a reparative experience, and there's actual brain change with this. Can you talk about that?
That's very exciting part to talk about.
Yeah.
So, um, a number of years ago, Imago headquarters began doing a number of different kinds of research studies to want to prove the efficacy of our model. And so one of them involved actual brain changes, monitoring people's brains, doing and I think it was an fMRI, magnetic resonance imaging, before the workshop and then after the workshop. And they could see differences in the brain, and they could see that the parts of the brain that are really about empathy and attunement, those kinds of parts of the brain that really focus on being able to hold another person's experience alongside your own, that those parts of the brains were really firing differently after the workshop. So that part was very exciting to know that and to realize that that was actually changing in the brain. Now, I've
And,
got to
and
be clear that
yeah, I just wanted to say it's so, and that is kind of so exciting, right? And you would have seen that change over, especially there's been an explosion really of research around brain science. But if you can create a space for your clients where they do feel safe and that they're not in fight or flight, there's actually repair in the brain. They're actually gaining more empathy capacity and actually developing their mirror neurons, which is that ability to really be with emotionally your partner, and then your life is not in fight or flight anymore, right? It's really changing the brain.
yes, although one thing that I do need to be clear about it is that, like anything, if we don't practice it, then we will slip back.
Mm-hmm.
That the material that's sort of laid down in this part of the brain, is got in there early and is there. And so we need to be intentional. We need to keep practicing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we get to keep practicing, it starts to become more robust and is able to be in a situation where you can actually uh, do things differently, even when it's starting to go a little bit sideways. I think that when couples can report that, we were driving and we started to get into a little bit of but one of us remembered to say, okay, so what I heard you say, which is the opening phrase of the dialogue, well, then you know that this big brain here is now working to be able to say, I know another way to do this. We don't have to do it the old way. Let's put this into practice. And the fact that they could do it when the fight flight's starting to happen and the arousal is starting to get going in the sympathetic system, that is a really good sign of brain change that's coming.
That's great, Maureen. And what do you recommend for clients to help them feel more embodied so that they're ready for a conversation with their partner? What would they do? Is there something that you would recommend that they do before they start the dialogue together, or to prepare? Anything in the context?
Well, there's a couple of suggestions I could offer. One would be to ask your partner to say, I got something I want to talk about, and when would that be a good time for us to do that? And so to make an appointment and to have a little bit of prep time so that you could each know that you're going to come and have one of these important conversations. And then as the speaker, what we think about is this idea of preparing yourself. Obviously, taking some good breaths and getting yourself feeling grounded and all of those things. But we use the metaphor of you're going to invite your partner to come visit you in your world, in your house, so to speak. And you're going to give them a little tour of the neighborhood about whatever this issue is that you want to talk about. And so you have a guest in your house now. And when you have a guest in your house and you think about it from that point of view, you tend to speak more kindly. You tend to be able to say, this is what's going on for me. This is about me and how I think and how I feel. And I really want you to just hear all this and be on the tour, as opposed to doing you always and you never, which is not going to get us very far, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I love what you're suggesting, because you're saying, check in with how we would talk to a friend, a good friend, and, what would be the kind of words we would use with a good friend, and what kind of tone might we use with our friend. We should be doing at least that with our partners, or even with ourselves. Even people can be, we can all be hard on ourselves, right? So what kind of tone can we use with ourselves?
And if we have to, we can say to our partner, this is really hard for me to talk about, or I've been kind of stewing about how to say this, or I know that I get kind of, stimulated when this stuff comes up, but bear with me, because I really want you to understand what's going on in my world. And I'm going to do my very best to be intentional, to try to describe it in a way that's about me and not about what you're doing wrong. And if you put out that kind of intention, most partners are going to be right there and say, okay, I'm here. Tell me what you can, and have a little bit more flexibility around when I slip a little bit and aren't able to have quite the right tone. Then it becomes a collaboration. And of course, this is another piece that we know from brain science, right, is that we co-regulate each other all the time. This is what caregivers with infants were doing all of the time, is that babies learned how to regulate themselves by being regulated by their caregivers and parents. And so we can do the same with our partners, so that if I start to get a little bit more activated and my partner is able to just say calmly, so what you're telling me is, then I kind of go, oh, and I settle back down again. And we have that capacity to really help each other stay in our big brain, as opposed to flipping our lid and the big brain going offline and us saying and doing all the things that is not our best.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I think that applies to someone who's even maybe not in relationship, if they're on their own, and that negative self-talk starts to happen. To be able to, put your hand on your heart and really, have a, kind of warm, compassionate kind of conversation with yourself to say, yeah, I'm suffering, right? This is hard. And so when someone is experiencing life from a 6-year-old experience or something like that, if there has been early childhood confusion, let's say, where, that flow hasn't been happening, they actually are soothing themselves to go, yeah, of course I feel this way right now, and this matters. And so,
Yes, this makes sense that I feel this way right now.
yeah.
And I need to just be with myself in that sense. Don't try to push it away and don't try to override it. Just allow myself to have it in a kind, compassionate way, as you say. And then we get to go to the next place. We don't stay there typically. It's when we try to push it away or push it down or something like that, then we tend to get stuck.
Yeah, and we just had Valentine's Day this weekend, right, on Sunday, and everybody's always really a little bit more buoyant, well, generally, unless they've just come out of a relationship ending, but they're generally buoyant. And I think of in childhood and elementary school, sending Valentines to each other. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to be validating of ourselves and of our partner, to kind of keep that sort of affirmation happening?
Well, you may be familiar with the work of an important researcher in couples counseling named John Gottman. And he has had a lot of very, very valuable information to us, to the field generally, over his work. And one of the simple ones is this idea of the ratio of 5 positives to 1 negative interaction. That he says that people who are masters at relationship, overall, they have 5 positive interactions to every negative one. He says it doesn't matter if people have big fights or they have quiet little fights, it's this 5 to 1 kind of ratio. And Valentine's Day can be pretty challenging for some people, but it is a way that it is kind of recognized to actually really make an effort to share some of those things that you do cherish about your partner. But a way to keep it going throughout the whole of the year would simply be to say something. If you could do it every day, boy, that would be fabulous. One thing I appreciate about you today, one thing that you did for me, or one quality about you that I appreciate. That alone will really help rebalance the relationship. And even one that's been kind of in negative territory for a while, then it's like all of a sudden we're putting all these, positive deposits into the relationship bank account. And so if we can do that, um, then that would be a very significant change. Now, part of that comes because we also have an appreciation that I'm worthwhile and I'm worthy and I deserve. And so that it kind of are linked. If I see myself as lovable, then I'm able to share what I see as lovable in another.
Yeah, that's great. And wouldn't that be a great way to start a conversation as well? Should we be saying that to our partner to start a conversation?
Oh, for sure. To be able to say, honey, one thing I really appreciated about you today is, and say whatever it is, and even if it's a small little thing, then that is incredibly helpful. Tisha talked about love languages in your last conversation,
Yeah,
and
Chapman's book.
yes, Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages. And that's a very helpful idea too, to be able to understand what is the thing that really sparks for you and for your partner, so that when you're doing something for your partner, what you're appreciating are going to be those things that speak to them. And
What do you,
once we
are there
go ahead.
tools that, are there little tips or like little tools that you can help clients? What do you recommend for clients to stay positive so that they are intentional about positive affirmation? Is there any little tricks of your practice that you can share?
Well, one of the things that I do say is, I begin sessions with couples where we do talk about appreciations over the last week or 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I do ask them to talk about what has been their contribution to the relationship space. We think about the two people here, the space in between is the relationship space, and it's very, very precious, and it needs to be gardened and nurtured in that sense. So, what is one thing that you have done that has contributed to that? And I ask them to do that even though I know that they have a very charged issue to talk about that they feel quite reactive around. Because I want people to be able to understand that both can sit there. I can love you and appreciate you and adore you, and I can be very frustrated about whatever this issue is that we share. It's not either or. And we get so wrought up in the fact that if you're not agreeing with me, then that must mean you're very different. And if you're different, I'm not sure I can love you in the same way. And certainly the way that I loved you back in the romantic stage when it seemed that we agreed on everything. And to be able to say to couples, well, no, you can both can live there side by side. And similarly, at the end of a conversation with people, even if it's been a very challenging one and there's been some real difficult moments, I ask them to say, well, what have you appreciated about your partner in this conversation? And usually it's things that are really about values. You showed up, you were present, you were honest, you dug down deep, you stayed with me, you worked really hard to listen. Those are all the things that are about attachment. And
Mm.
so every time we have a successful conversation, even if the um, outcome isn't immediately perfectly changed behavior, then we're building a block to go to the next place and the next place and the next place, and we're earning this secure attachment. So it's important to slow down enough to be able to honor the hard work that you've done and appreciate your partner for the hard work they've done as well.
So, Maureen, do you notice, is it harder for couples that you work with to acknowledge their partner, or is it harder for them to acknowledge the positive things about themselves? What do they struggle the most with?
It depends a little bit, actually. It would be hard for me to give a generalization. Um, what what often happens is that we start to see our partner as the problem, if not the enemy. And really, it's just that our partner is different. They think about things differently than we do. They've had different experiences that have formed their perspectives. But we get threatened by that difference. And so our first approach typically is to blame them. And then it's a little bit harder for us to say, well, what's my role in this? What have
Mm-hmm.
I been doing? How have I been contributing to this? And
Mm.
that's a little harder for most of us to be willing to look at. But once we get that on the table, then we get to get curious about, well, why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? And your partner gets to say why they're doing what they're doing. And then we get to have this kind of double vision, right? I get to see my partner as the beautiful person they are now, and I get a sense of seeing them as a younger person and having a better appreciation of what might be driving some of their behaviors now. And when that happens, well, then all kinds of possibilities are available.
Mm. Yeah, you're breaking that power struggle that can show up usually when a client first comes. There's some power struggle at the stage of the relationship. So, are you finding that that really helps with
Absolutely.
stopping the power struggle?
Absolutely. And part of what I also say to couples is sometimes people will come in and say, I'm okay, but this person over here is the problem. And I have to say to them, both of you, it takes two to tango is the cliche that covers that. And it's just not likely to be that one person over here is going to be up here, the paragon of mental health and
Hmm.
completely all got it together. And the other person over here is just a poor, struggling, disintegrating person. It's just not how it works, right?
And in
Uh,
fact, actually, the person that is kind of often made to feel the disintegrating person is actually the stronger of the two because they've got the ego strength to go, okay, yeah, I think I got that wrong. I could get better at that. And let me be
right?
curious about that.
And
Yeah.
certainly both partners have some strengths and vulnerabilities.
Mm.
And so if I could come back to my workaholic couple, for example.
Mhm.
So maybe that partner who's the workaholic really does need to be able to have a little bit of personal growth that could say, I am good enough. I don't have to put in all these extra hours and do all of these things. I can set some boundaries. I'm entitled to have a life, separate from the 24/7 technology requirements these days. And so that would be good growth. And that way, the person who's saying, you're always going to work, nag, 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 is calling them into health in that way. And vice versa. The person who is in that place of saying, you're always leaving me, you're always breaking the promises, probably needs to have some opportunity to learn that they can manage on their own, that they can have a separate kind of life. That doesn't mean that they're separated lives, but just that they can be able to manage on their own, have other interests, other friends that enrich them, those kinds of things. And so that way, the workaholic person is calling this person into some help. So once you get all that on the table, that it's about healing and growth for both, well, then it is sometimes really the amazing process that I was talking about earlier that I get to facilitate and witness.
Yeah, and I think about young people, or well, younger than us people. My kids, for instance, they're in their, starting their lives kind of thing. Their careers are really quite demanding. I mean, the average, most people are working a lot of hours because they have to work a lot of hours to really support living where they're living. And so, how do you help people manage the stresses in their lives? Because stress would is going to create more stress for the limbic system and more charge then in the relationship. Because those projections, those filing cabinets start flying around under stress conditions.
For sure. So, obviously, all of the things that we would say to an individual in terms of self care and de stressing strategies would all apply here as well. But as a couple, they need to be able to say, all right, here's the reality that we're in right now based on this stage of our life. And it's clearly a developmental stage. So, how do we manage that? It's the same thing as when a couple has a child for the first time. They need to be able to have a strategy about how they still protect a little bit of couple time, still nurture the relationship, um, so that they can figure out, all right, we need to plan some things. We need to plan for date night. We need to plan to have sex dates. Like, we need to be strategic about this, because if we just sort of let it happen, it won't happen. And back when we were in the romantic stage, we planned dates, we planned getting together, we looked forward to it, and we had a great time anticipating it, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow we think that in this other place it should be easier somehow. And it's not, because
Mm.
we do live in a world where people have these cell phones that go on 24 hours. And so we have to be strategic and protect our couple time as best we can, because we know that one of the things that is the best de-stressor is to spend good time with our partners. Right? That co-regulation thing that I was speaking about beforehand, that that sense of being connected and laughing with your partner and having just some time of connection will be the single best thing to help bring down that stress than anything else that we have.
So you're building a safe, secure relationship that you want to plug into, basically, so that you're actually, it's a place of a safe landing in a way.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We want couples to know that their partner has their back and that they have their own little couple bubble, so to speak, that they
Mm.
can get recharged inside that couple bubble, and that it needs both partners to do their best to try to protect it.
So getting the love you need is it that we choose a partner that's kind of has familiar qualities to our parents so that we can work it out?
And that would be one way to put it, that there's the partner has some of the positive, and it's always important to remember that, the positive as well as some of the negative traits of our caregivers. And it's not exact, as I was saying earlier, it's more that is able to evoke this feeling in me that feels so similar.
Mm.
So once we understand that unconscious blueprint, then we get to work with it in a very different way. And then we actually get to use this big brain on our behalf.
Hmm. And do you suggest that clients use a kind of hand signal? You're talking about flip the lid with Dan Siegel, but I'm just wondering if if you suggest clients have a hand signal if they sense a power struggle that is, they're kind of stuck, that they would take time out or something and then come back to the conversation to resolve and have resolution. I was going to say revolution.
It
Yeah.
could be that too. Yes, we do suggest, Joanne, that people typically couples have repetitive fights, the same fight in various formations over and over and over again. And so when you recognize, oh, here we go again, it's very useful to have some kind of a code word or some kind of a signal that says, okay, we've been down this road 100 times. Let's not go down this road.
Mm.
Let's try to find a different way to do it. And so to have a prearranged agreement about what we're going to do when somebody calls the timeout signal or the code. And generally speaking, we know that it takes people a minimum of 20 minutes to be able to start to make that shift from the fight flight response, to have the parasympathetic system come back online. So while that 20 minutes timeout is happening, then that's when you need to do what you can do to soothe yourself. This is not the time to think to yourself, yeah, and another thing my partner does, and there's another thing, like to kind of stoke the fire. Well, you could, but it's just not going to get you anywhere very helpful.
Mm.
Instead, it's to be able to say, all right, I need to do what I can do that I know helps me to be calmer, and helps me to start to get my curiosity online. Like, why do we have that same fight over and over again? What goes on for me? And to spend more time thinking about your own reactivity rather than trying to figure out your partner's. And then you have to be willing to come back together and somehow the two of you acknowledge, that wasn't our finest moment there, but I really would like to figure out a different way and find out what's happening. So would you be willing to have an Imago dialogue with me where we could start to sort out what is actually really pushing from behind on this particular issue? And if it's a really charged issue, some couples need help to have a person to help facilitate that. One of the things that I like about Imago therapy is that it's designed for me as a therapist to become obsolete, like to teach these skills and have people practice them, and then have them start to practice smaller things at home so that eventually they can learn how to do it and be able to manage these kinds of situations on their own, which I think is a really empowering way. One of the kind of mission statements that Imago has is that we want to revolutionize, we want to change the world one couple at a time, because we know, like back to that idea of the relational space, our children grow up in this space right here. And so if this is good relational space and our children are growing up in that, well, all kinds of possibilities are possible at that point in terms of people having capacity to be attuned and connected to people. So but it starts with us saying, this isn't working, and rather than do the same old, let's try something different.
I know it's true, actually, the sense that if you can actually stretch the tolerance for the feelings that you're having in the relationship and be able to talk through the confusion, because it's just confusion, and actually then stay with it, you can actually create a repair of what maybe was confusing at a younger age, and then be in the lifelong relationship, really, with yourself, right? And so the sense of like really being in a relationship with yourself, that you're able to kind of be curious about what you're saying and what you're experiencing, whether it's the shoes at the door like you mentioned before, but you're really always curious about yourself, and that's empowering for clients, really, really empowering. And it does empower the relationship so that you're not just, bonking your partner and, and blaming and shaming and then, impacting kids and, but that's an ideal world. But unfortunately, what are the stats today about marriages?
Roughly speaking, about 40% of first marriages end in divorce. We don't have very good recent statistics about this because of the changes that happened with the long form census in Stats Canada and all of that kind of political brouhaha. We do know, one of the more disturbing kinds of trends is we do know that the ratio of divorce in older couples, so those would be people, say, 55 and up, that's skyrocketing. And so these would be relationships where we've been together for 20, 25, 30 years, and now they are calling it quits. So in British Columbia, it's been pretty stable for the last 7 or 8 years. And we know that younger people tend not to marry, they tend to live together. And so it's not as well tracked as it was when people were actually getting married and getting divorced and that was being recorded in courts. But I think what happens is where we compare our relationships to the messages that we get from Hollywood, novels, all kinds of sources that suggest that we should be able to be in the same state that we are at the beginning of a relationship when all those chemicals are running. And when that stops, then that somehow suggests something is wrong, right? And instead, we need to understand that those chemicals we habituate to, and now there are possibilities of seeing our person that we're with as somewhat different from us, and we learn to differentiate. And so many people throw in the towel at that point when they have the sense of, incompatibility. Whereas Imago would say, well, incompatibility is not grounds for divorce. Incompatibility is grounds for growth. Let's go. Let's begin to figure out how this all works, right? So it's very tragic, Joanne, when you think about how little relationship education happens in the world. That, we'll give kids sex ed, mostly sex ed to prevent disease, and we might give them interview skills or something like that, but we do so little about here's what is very normative in relationships. And you just need to know this is how it is. It doesn't mean you aren't supposed to be together. It just means that some growth and healing needs to happen.
So, Maureen, I just wanted to add to what you're saying with well, the trends have actually changed. You're right. It's gone from, it used to be 50% of all marriages, and now it's gone to 40%. So I think the trends are actually are getting more hopeful. But part of that is, you're saying as well, that people are marrying a little bit later. That seems to be a trend, with younger people marrying later than, say, our generation. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that's really interesting is this research around dopamine, and that there's a drop in dopamine in midlife, and that may account for the sense that some marriages start to fail, because dopamine is the drug that makes us feel, or the hormone that makes us feel excited, and there's a drop in it in later adolescence, and there's also a drop of it again in midlife, and that actually may play out in terms of why there's sometimes more affairs and things like that in midlife now. Well, there probably was all the way along, but it's now being more recognized. And maybe I think there's more stimulation now, that there's more in our lives, with both couples working typically, and more stresses in our lives, and we have to come back to what you're saying before, is to really manage those stresses and spend some time really connecting, being really intentional about our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to say yes, you're right.
Yes,
I agree.
I think that what also happens is two other factors. I think one is that, with the double jobs and raising children, couples often just kind of put their head down and just kind of go through it. And then when their children get to be, late adolescents, young adults getting ready to, they're having more independent lives, and the partners kind of look at each other and sort of say, well, like, who are you? Like, I haven't really connected with you in any meaningful way for such a long time. And then I think the other factor is just the access to all of the potential exits. In this way, the technology has not been kind to relationships. It's everything from Facebook reconnecting with your high school sweetheart to all the, Ashley Madison apps, et cetera, et cetera. There is just so many more temptations that say, if you do this, then you'll feel alive and juicy and all of that again, to get some of that good dopamine feeling, and you'll feel alive and juicy like I felt back at the beginning with you. And we kind of go for the quick fix, as opposed to recognizing, well, there's has to be some ways that we can do things inside our relationship, bring in something new. That doesn't have to be big new, but even small new. Just break up our routine a little bit. That'll give us a hit of dopamine and work
Yes.
with what we want.
Yes, often couples feel so good when they're away on holidays, and that's probably because they're
Yes,
way more in tune.
exactly. Exactly.
And
They're in a different environment. It's new.
novel, yeah, the novelty.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
probably try something different. They go for a, boat ride, or decide to try out scuba diving. I'm assuming they're in someplace warm by the beach. So then it's easier to have all that. And then you come back and you have all this kind of drudgery again. And one of the things we know is that if a couple goes on the same date night every, the same thing is going to happen. You got to mix up your date nights and do something different, and try something that you've never tried before. Have some fun today.
Yeah, this whole series, the 10 weeks of Shine in 2016, is about your good energy. And I think I love what you're saying today about, it's really, really like, keep your life novel and keep your relationship growing by, going to the I statements, and to really be curious about why we're triggered, and really then from that place, really having more meaningful, intimate conversations with our partners or with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. You got it.
Yeah. So can you actually, let's just go through the Imago steps for the Imago dialogue. What do you do first? Let's just run it through.
So essentially, you would ask for an appointment,
Mm-hmm.
And then you would say an appreciation and state your intention. Like, I want to talk about this because I want to feel closer. I want to resolve this. I want to find a way through this. And then you would say what goes on for you. And in that place, your partner is going to demonstrate that they are really attempting to hear you by mirroring back with what you've said. And then when you finish saying all that you need to say, your partner is going to highlight and summarize the key points. And then your partner is going to say, and this is often the place of the stretch, why that makes sense. This is not about agreeing, but it is about saying, okay, I sort of get that, because if I go back to my example, because your father was alcoholic, that when I'm always canceling our dates because of my work commitments, it makes you feel the same way. I get that. That makes sense. And I imagine you start to feel kind of unloved and unimportant. And have I got you? And then you will say, yes, you have got me. And because we do know that it's two to tango, then at some point you need to have the partner say what goes on for them around this business of working so much. And then it'll be your turn to listen and really hear and try very hard to understand, even though you don't like it. You need to stretch to be able to say, okay, I understand that for you it feels like you have no choice right now, but you've got to do what the boss wants. And so given that then, and we're both now thinking about it as a problem that we together need to strategize around, what are some ideas, what are some potential ways that we could change our behavior to try to see if we can deal with this differently? That's it in a
Thank,
nutshell.
thank you. So, Maureen, how do people get a hold of you if they want to find out about Getting the Love You Need, workshops that you offer through the year, or if they just want to come and see you as a couple? How will people get a hold of you?
So if they want to find out about the workshop, which we offer several times a year, myself and my business partner, Tamara Edelman, we do that. They just need to go to our website, which is imagovancouver.com. And if they wanted to see either of us for some private sessions, through that same website, you could either go to my little subpage or Tamara's subpage and read about us, and then be able to contact us for an appointment.
Wonderful. Maureen, thank you so much. There's so much great information. And again, it's all coming back to what we want to have in our lives, what the energy, the positivity that we want to have in our lives. It really is about us. And I just so appreciate all of the wisdom you've shared today. Thank you so much, Maureen, as well as all of our speakers through the Shine in 2016 series are volunteering their time today in this whole series that's about your best energy for 2016. And so next week we will have Joni Marr, who is going to be, she's a master certified coach, professional coach, and she speaks all over the world. Really excited to welcome her next week. And she's going to talk about how to bring your most passionate, values-based life to your career. How do you get there? How do you make sure that you are really connected spiritually and soulfully and passionately to the career that you are in, or how do you figure out what you want to do next? So that'll be really wonderful too. So in the meantime, please feel free to comment on today's session. You'll notice that below this little box of where you're watching us, there's a Facebook community page. Feel free to add any kind of comments that you've got about what you've learned today, anything about the series that you're really enjoying or that you'd like to see more of. And I'd really appreciate that. It would be wonderful. And thank you as well to the program, the not-for-profit Dress for Success, who is providing just wonderful opportunities for women who are re-entering the workplace. They provide everything from a resume to professional help to gain them information about how to run an interview or how to design their career and live sustainably for themselves and their children. So it's really, they're doing some wonderful things with Dress for Success. So if you decide you wanted to buy the archive and hear the other speakers that have happened prior to this one today with Maureen, you can do that for $49. And the proceeds from that will be going to Dress for Success. So I'm Joanne Weiler. Thank you so much for being here this week, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week with Joni Marr. Bye-bye for now.